Hi, I'm Nick.
And I'm Christina.
And welcome to the Elements of Poetry. Okay, I realize poetry may not be your first choice in reading, but I have to tell you, there's more to it than meets the eye.
Which is exactly the point of our program today. What's this poetry thing all about? Why should you want to read poetry? And how, if at all, can you enjoy reading it?
Actually, you can enjoy poetry. And today our sole purpose in life is to show you how. But first, a little about how we operate.
If you've seen our other programs, you know we do things a little differently around here. Rather than give you lots of information and then ask you questions, we give you the chance to show your stuff up front.
How? By showing you a quiz question before we cover each major topic. You pick your answer, then we'll talk to the experts who help us decide on the correct answer.
So what do you say? Ready to enter the exciting, yes I said exciting, world of poetry? Great. Here's a quick rundown of the main topics we'll be discussing.
We'll talk about poetic techniques, including figurative language.
It means using language in tricky ways that make words say more than they mean on the surface.
We'll also talk about rhyme, rhythm,
and musical devices, and we'll also explore what we mean by tone. Lots of ground to cover, which means we better get busy.
You can think of poetic techniques as the tools of the poet's trade.
The tools a poet uses to create good literature. There are things like rhyme and meter, simile and metaphor.
Which brings us to our first question.
Which of the following is not, I repeat, not a form of figurative language? A, simile, B, imagery, C, glossaries, or D, metaphor? If you said C, glossaries, you're starting off great. That word is not a form of figurative language. And to get examples of the others, we'll go to our experts and poets in just a minute. But before we do, we'd like you to think about one other word for just a second. Overlapping. Any idea what that means?
In poetry, when we talk about overlapping definitions, we mean that one definition can be very much like another one, or partly like it. And they can be so similar, in some cases, it's hard to tell them apart.
And why do we tell you this? Because many of the figurative language definitions we're about to explore are very similar to each other. For that reason, we're going to keep it as simple as possible. For instance,
denotation is the dictionary meaning of a word, and connotation is a second meaning.
Take the word home, for example. By denotation, it simply means a place where you live. The connotative meaning, however, is all the things the word home suggests beyond its dictionary meaning. Things like security, love, comfort, and family. Now let's examine imagery.
Imagery is when you use words to make reference to a visual image or a sensory image, so that the words would evoke a response in which the reader would form a picture in his or her mind or experience a sensation, a feeling that the words trigger for them.
The gray sea and the long black land, and the yellow half-moon large and low, and the startled little waves that leap in fiery ringlets from their sleep.
In this poem, the poet carefully chose words that would trigger visual and sensory images. Now let's look at alliteration.
Alliteration in poetry refers to a repetition of the same sound at the beginning of a word.
That is, the repetition of the same beginning sound in several words in the poem, like this.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers.
In this little poem, the repetitive P sound creates alliteration. And then there's assonance.
Assonance refers to repetition of vowel sounds, either at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of a word.
Go low and slow below the ridge, you'll see a tree beside the bridge.
The repetitive vowel sounds in low, slow, and below, and see a tree create assonance. Now let's examine symbol.
A symbol is an object or sometimes an idea within a story that also carries a deeper meaning.
Symbol can be roughly defined as something that means more than what it is. Here's an example.
'tis but a ring, a band of gold, that binds young lovers till they're old. Its brilliant metal, gleaming bright, lights the way across the night.
This poem suggests that a ring is a band of gold, but also a symbol of love. Next, we have allusion.
An allusion is when a poet makes a reference to another literary text, a poem, a mythological story, or something else that brings the meanings associated with that other thing into his or her poem. For example, in E.E. Cummings' poem, In Just, he refers to the balloon man as being goat-footed, and this is a reference to the mythological character from Greek mythology, Pan, who's half man and half goat, or the figure of the satyr, which is half man and half goat in Greek mythology.
Here's a passage from the E.E. Cummings poem, In Just, that uses allusion.
The goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee.
This poem suggests or alludes that the balloon man is like the mythological Pan or Satyr, which are associated with the season spring.
Now you're probably beginning to see what we meant by overlapping definitions, but we hope you're also thinking about how colorful and beautiful the poetic language is. If you stop and think about it, it gives us new and different ways to think about the world around us.
And that's really what all good literature is about. We read it and we get a fresh and new perspective on some aspect of life.
Poetry is a way of trying to understand the world and trying to understand what it means to be a human being in the world among other human beings within our particular cultures. By writing poetry, poets are processing their experiences and their observations of the world and trying to distill them down into a very precise kind of language which will convey their perceptions to other people. In reading poetry, you're really exploring other people's philosophical musings on what it means to be a human being, what it means to live in this world. And poetry, therefore, can teach you a great deal about other people and about yourself.
And speaking of new perspectives, let's tackle a few more of those overlapping definitions.
True or false? Hyperbole, metaphor, simile are all forms of figurative language.
They're all true. Let's get the scoop on each one.
Hyperbole is an overstatement or exaggeration meant to place emphasis.
She said, if I don't give this kiss, I'll die. And I said, if you kiss me, I can fly.
Using hyperbole, this poem overstates the power of a kiss. It may be fun, but it's not worth dying for, and it can't make you fly.
Now about metaphor and simile.
Metaphor and simile are very similar. Simile is a comparison between two things using the words like or as. Here's an example.
Your eyes are like the brightest stars. Your cheeks are aglow like the face of Mars.
Using the word like, the poem states that a person's eyes and cheeks are like the stars and the face of Mars. Metaphor is a comparison between two things without using the words like or as. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare uses metaphor when Romeo, seeing a light coming from Juliet's room, says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." He compares Juliet's window to the east, where the sun rises, and Juliet herself to the sun. Now let's check out another poetic technique, onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia is the use of words that sound like what they mean.
The pistol popped with a pow, pow, pow. The big dog barked with a bow, wow, wow. The cat took off with a meow, meow, meow.
Onomatopoeia is using words that imitate the thing itself, using sound or rhythm. Pow, bow wow, and meow are examples. Now, let's look at oxymoron. It's a figure of speech that joins together two seemingly contradictory elements. Let's listen to an example.
Here with you in the bright night, we climb the little hill. Here with you in the darkest light, we keep our movement still.
The words bright night and darkest light seemingly contradict each other, but the poetic effect is pleasing.
Okay, some pretty impressive performances, I'd say. In fact, I'd call that an understatement.
Here's our next question. Which of these are forms of poetic technique?
A. Understatement. B. Sentimentality. C. Personification. D. All of the above. Or E. None of the above.
Sounds like D to me. All of the above. Understatement is the opposite of hyperbole. In other words, understatement minimizes what we know to be true.
Sitting down to a large meal, you might say, "Now this is a tasty little morsel." That would be understatement.
Sentimentality means overly emotional ideas.
Or indulging in emotion for its own sake. Here's an example.
The glittering starlight, twinkling tenderly in your delicate, lovely lilac hair, will light the painful path my heart must wander in despair.
Often, the overly sentimental poem will use cliches and pathos to evoke emotion. Now, how about personification? That's giving a human characteristic to an animal, object, or idea. Here's an example.
The wind among the leaves becomes his voice, whispering that I shall be his choice.
This poem suggests that the wind takes on a human characteristic, the voice of a loved one.
Are these some creative geniuses or what? Who said poetry had to be boring?
Poetry is never boring, even when the subject is more serious. Now, you may have heard something in these poems that we haven't talked about yet.
Let me guess, rhyme and rhythm.
How'd you guess that? I know, you've been listening to it all along. So what exactly is it?
Rhyme is a no-brainer, right? For instance, the minute you step through the door, you'll walk a block to the grocery store. But walking can be quite a chore if you don't first get off the floor.